Ukraine refusing to sign a trade and association agreement with the EU. Live now to Patrick Young. He's a writer and financial advisor, and he joins me now live from Poland. Mr. Patrick Young, welcome to RT. It's great to talk to you as always. So the European Council President has called the deal the most ambitious offer ever to a non-member state. Maybe Ukraine should have taken a more long-term perspective here.
Well, I think it's very interesting because, of course, President Barroso, one of many presidents within the European Union, is very, very keen to try and make sure that everybody realises that the European Union has been bending over backwards. But at the same time, frankly, the deal wasn't that great. The president himself of Ukraine, Mr. Yanukovych, arrived last night and described it as being little more than something in a sweet wrapper. There was only a few €100 million potentially on offer at a time when it's well known that for the past year, Ukraine has been negotiating for a line of credit to the tune of €15 billion with the International Monetary Fund. So therefore, this really was an aspirin to cure an appendicitis.
Interesting, because the president of the Euro Commission touched on Russia's proposal of joining talks on the deal. And let's now listen together to what he had to say.
For a bilateral agreement between the European Union and Ukraine, there should be no trilateral format. The times of limited sovereignty are over in Europe.
So, Patrick, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's an absolutely remarkable statement. Mr. Barroso is telling us that the times of limited sovereignty are apparently coming to an end in Europe. And presumably that's meant to be some sort of a slight against Russia. Yet Mr. Barroso is a president who barely was elected by a couple of dozen people out of a European Union population of just over 500 million. The stinking hypocrisy of the European Union in these issues is quite unreal. Of course, what we have is a petulant President Barroso who's extremely upset because the easternward expansion of the European Union has for the first time in 20 years been checked. And it's been checked because when Ukraine read the small print of the deal, they realised that actually they couldn't possibly manage to make the thing work. It was going to render short-term huge economic difficulties for Ukraine. And this is a country for whom actually most of their trade is to the east. 20% with the likes of Russia, 6 or 7% with Turkey. In fact, the only European Union country really on the radar would have been its neighbour Poland, around about 7% in terms of its total trade. So realistically, the idea that Mr. Barroso is sitting around telling the rest of the world that the European Union is so superior and a wonderfully democratic organisation when he himself played a role in trying to remove the governments of Greece and replace it with a non-democratic alternative, when he worked to replace, indeed, similarly, a technocratic government in Italy, it absolutely reeks of hypocrisy.
Just before the summit kicked off on Thursday, the president of the Euro Parliament admitted, that Europe had underestimated Ukraine's grave economic state, but now we're back to blaming Russia for this fail. But why do you think EU leaders are not admitting to their shortcomings?
Oh, well, good grief. If the European Union's leaders, whether individually or collectively, started admitting to their shortcomings, there'd be no end of problems, wouldn't there? Look at the European Union. Massive rank unemployment throughout the course of the entire Union. We've got things like 50% plus youth unemployment in several Mediterranean countries. They have a euro currency project which is a fiasco, built on sand by the sort of deluded technocrats who believe that they know the best thing for all people. And therefore, realistically, the only thing the European Union can try to do is keep blame-storming anybody, Russia, who cares? Because ultimately, the European Union, what started and has rendered a wonderful supranational trade project, is ultimately falling apart at the seams because it has become itself a crumbling Soviet-style empire, which in many cases replicates some of the more ridiculous facets of the old Soviet Union. The truth is, right now, we have dynamism in the eastern part of Europe, and unfortunately, Western bureaucrats, Western political leaders within the European Union fail to, or simply are incapable of understanding the realities of the New Deal. That is, the sovereignty, the centre of economic growth is moving east in this world, and that means countries like Russia and all the way to Asia. The difficulty is, from Brussels, that's a long way away. And the problem we have is that Western leaders are not willing to realise that their nations, and indeed their great economic project, their great supranational political project, the European Union, is ultimately doomed unless they realise they must do more at the bottom level and actually leave economies to prosper in their own right.
Patrick Young, writer and financial advisor, talking to us live from Poland. Patrick, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.